Hi and welcome to DACAscript. So today we're going to be talking about SQL Server 2016 Dynamic Data Masking. This video is going to be split into two different sections. The first section is going to be talking about what is data masking, what you can do with it, what are its limitations, security issues, and the second part is going to be actually applying a mask, or actually a couple different masks in SQL. So it's up to you if you guys want to know the entire bit of information, or if you're just looking for the lab, kind of how do I do it, then there will be a link in the description to skip to that section. So feel free to use that. If you are going for the exam, then I would recommend watching the entire first bit, because it'll give you a bit more information of what you can do with data masking, as well as the issues that are present with it. So first off, what is dynamic data masking, or DDM? In the Microsoft documentation you will see it as DDM. So what it does is it modifies the output and not the actual data in the table. So your table, or your data within your table, is still stored in exactly the same way. It's just that dependent on the permissions of the user that's accessing that data will depend on if they see the masked value, so a kind of like skewed value of the real data, or if they'll actually see the data itself. So it's a very easy way to well, basically make changes. So because of that, it doesn't require any change into existing applications. So if you have an application that now stores the credit card in the database, you don't want to show that to every single user. You could technically use masking in order to hide those values unless those users are in a specific role. Now that could be a database role or an Active Directory role, or if they're specific users that can actually see that data. So you could cut it down on that side, but it's not foolproof, as we'll find out in later. And this is a new feature which is in SQL Server 2016. The exact version is 13.x and above. And it's also in Azure as well, so Azure, so it is available in there, though it's a little bit different in there. So this is just talking about the SQL Server version of data masking rather than the Azure stuff. So there's different types. So there's different types of kind of masks which are already set up. So the first one is default, and that's full masking according to the data types of the designated fields. Sorry guys. So what that will actually do, if you've got string data types, which is char, nchar, varchar, nvarchar, text or ntext, it will actually use 4 x's. Now if it's fewer than that number of x's, then or fewer x's if the size of the field is less than 4 characters. There we go. So if you only had 2 characters in that, it would just show 2 x's. Really simple way of kind of skewing your data, but it'll work. So for numeric data types, which is your big int, bit, decimal, int, money, numeric, small int, small money, tiny int, float, and real, it'll just switch it all out to 0. So no matter what was in that field, it'll switch it to 0. You've got a salary field, it'll switch that to 0. Now for date and time data types, it will use the default date in SQL, which is 1st of July 1900, and then just zeros on the time. So that's for date, datetime 2, datetime offset, small datetime, etc. and time. And then for your binary data types, it will just use a single byte of ASCII value 0. So that's just for your binary, var binary, and image data types. So if you guys are wondering how you actually apply the mask, we will be going into this within the actual labs itself. But if you're using, for example, a create table statement, so you create table, then you open parentheses, you will then have this field which is phone, it's varchar 12, and they do this masked with, then you open the brackets, function equals default. Now these two are quite important. For some of the different types of masks you will actually have to put in certain parameters. With default, it's just default, nice and easy, but that's literally how you do it. So that would just be a very simple statement in order to get it. It's not too bad. You can of course also use alter table, alter column, etc. and so forth, or add column, and then do the mask with. All of that kind of work, all of those kind of standard things. It's just exactly the same as if you're really adding a constraint or changing a data type, etc. and so forth. So you can do it quite easily. So another one of the defaults is email. So this is a masking method which exposes the first letter of an email address and then the constant suffix of .com. So it will replace. It doesn't matter if it's a .net. It will replace it with .com, but it will still look like an email address. So what we end up having, there we go. Same kind of function, exactly the same. So create table, open brackets, email varchar 100, masked with, and then open brackets, function equals email, and then again there's no parameters for this one, which is nice and easy. Now this happened to be at the end of a statement, so ignore that it's got closed parameters. That would be that's in there. But what that will actually look like, because of course the first one didn't really need an example of that one. However, this one, it doesn't help to actually see it. So we can see we've got this R, J, and Z. These are all from the Microsoft kind of documentation, by the way. So R, you can see that was the first character, and then .com at the end. So it didn't matter that it was at contoso.com or contoso.com.co or contoso.net. It will replace all of it with .com and just have 4 X's, so it really does mask it. Same with the beginning as well. You can't guess the number of characters that are in there. It will properly mask it. So the next one is random. So a random data masking function for use on any numeric type to mask the original value with a random value within a specified range. Okay. It's a lot easier to actually show you guys the command. Again, create table, blah 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 blah, open brackets, salary, money, masked with, and then function equals random. Now notice that there's actually some arguments in here. Really easy to remember. It's the lowest value and the highest value, the starting value and the end value. So it'll be random number between 1 and 12. So nice and easy to remember. There's also custom string. So this is where you can kind of do your own thing a little bit with this one. So it's a masking method which exposes the first and last letters and adds a custom padding string in the middle, right? So if you have a look at this one, we've again got another function. Function equals partial. So this is where it's a bit weird, I think, because they've called it custom string. I think I should call it partial. But what will happen here? It will show the first character. Then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 X's. And then apparently there's nothing on the end. You could actually do some other stuff where it just does like, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4 or something like 4 X's, and then whatever's on the end. You could put something like that in there. You can mess around with this one. It is one of those that you do need to mess around with in order to understand it. We will have a play in a bit as well. So a couple words about permissions on masking itself. So you don't need any special permissions to create a table with dynamic mask. This is something you should be aware of. So only the standard create, table, and alter on schema permissions. Okay, so if you've got somebody that can create a table, they'll be able to create a mask. But if you're adding, replacing, or removing a mask, the mask of a column, it requires the alter any mask permission. Okay, so if you've actually created it and they then need to alter it, say they put on a default and they now need to switch it to email as a type of mask, well, you're going to have to give them extra permission. So it's something to be aware of. That if you do have any problems, that'll be why. They'll say, well, I was able to create it. Well, why can't I edit it? Well, this is why. It's an extra permission within SQL Server. And obviously they'll need the alter permission on the table. That kind of speaks for itself, I think. So it's appropriate to grant the alter any mask to a security officer, for example. So users with a select permission, this kind of makes sense. Users with a select permission on a table can view the data, the table data, okay? Columns that are defined as masked will display the masked data because they don't have the permission. But you can grant the unmasked permission to a user to enable them to retrieve unmasked data from the columns for which masking is defined. Okay, there is a big problem with unmask. You cannot do grant unmask on table X to, I don't know, let's go with Bob. So you can't give Bob just the unmask on a specific table, and you can't give him it just on a specific column. Unmask is completely database wide. That's why it's a really bad idea. That is the biggest drawback of it. I think that Microsoft does have on their plan in order to have unmask on actual objects and also on columns, because it would make perfect sense for it. But at the minute they don't, so that's its biggest drawback. So the control permission on the database includes both alter any database and unmask permission. So if you're a sysadmin, you've got control. There's a couple other ones as well. I've got control. I'm pretty sure that security admin's got control. I need to have a good look over all the default permissions again. But yeah, so they will have it by default. That means that if you're a sysadmin, which you probably are, especially if you're doing lab stuff, you already have the access to see the unmasked one. So there is a way that we'll have to do it in the labs. We'll actually have to set up a user in order to show the masked and unmasked value. It's really easy though. So yeah, extra stuff. So creating a mask on a column does not prevent updates to the column, so that makes sense. So you could have, again, this is where it's good for an application where you need to hide that data, but actually you don't want to make any application changes. So you could have an application that stores the credit card number of somebody. You then mask that so somebody can't just query the entire table and get all the credit card details of your customers. However, you still want to be able to actually do updates. So say they've got a new credit card number, you can enter that into your application and you can actually save it. It's only done when you're doing a select, so it's only masked on select. Like I said before, it's still stored exactly the same way. It's just when it's actually being displayed back to a user that doesn't have permission that then the mask is applied right at the last step. So that's pretty much just saying what I just said. So although the users received mask data when querying the mask column, the same users can update the data if they have right permissions. So obviously your permissions have got to be in place, but a proper access control policy should still be used to limit and update your permissions. Makes sense, or limit update permissions, which is something we'll talk about in another kind of video, I think. So if you can only see the mask value if you're using the select into or insert into to copy the data from a mask column into another table, results in the mask data in the target table. So basically all this is really saying, it's actually pretty badly worded, or I've just read it wrong. If you haven't got permissions to see the data, you can't just suddenly go and select into and it will just unmask it. It masks it when it's showing it to you, so when it's showing it to you in that select, it will then mask it on those insert intos or select intos, which makes sense. You know, you won't want people to be able to get around it that easily. And dynamic data masking is applied when running SQL Server import and export, so exactly the same thing as before. So if you're exporting it using you could use BCP, or you could use bulk export, or you could use the typical kind of tools, SSIS, whatever you're going to be using. It'll be exactly the same. So a database containing the masked columns will result in an exported data file with masked data, assuming it's exported by a user without the unmasked privileges. If you do have those privileges, it'll unmask it for you. Great. And the imported database will contain statically masked data. Sorry, really struggling to read at the minute. Don't know why. So there is an example on the Microsoft documentation of how you can actually find out these columns. We'll use that a little bit later. I'll show you the link to the Microsoft documentation because they've got some really good kind of lab work. So there we go. We can see that will bring up those. So actually, I've already taken some screenshots of what we're going to be doing later on. So you can at least see what table name it is, what the name is. So that'll be the column name. If it's masked, yep. So we've got this is mask 1, and also the function that's on it. So you can actually see those, see what's actually been masked, and you can see how it's been masked as well. So there's a couple limitations and restrictions on dynamic data masking. A masking rule cannot be defined for the column following column types. So you obviously need to be aware of this. Encrypted columns, always encrypted. That makes perfect sense. I'd have no idea why you'd want to use always encrypted columns and then put a mask on top of it. It wouldn't make too much sense, so you can't do it anyway. Also file stream data, so if you're not familiar with file stream, that is to do with storing the files externally, or not really externally, more on a Windows kind of like file share type area and having a pointer within the database to that location. You've also got column set or sparse column, that is part of a column set. So we'll kind of talk about those in another video, definitely. And a mask cannot be configured on a computed column, but if the computed column depends on a column with a mask, the computed column will return the mask data, which makes sense. So say if you had a computed column which adds first name and last name is masked, then you're going to have that masked last name. Makes sense. Yeah, which does make sense. But of course you can't go, okay, I've got a computed column which is first name and last name, and then I want to actually mask that computed column. That kind of makes sense in a way. And also a column with data masking cannot be a key for a full text index. That also makes sense because well, you're masking the data, so you're not going to be able to actually really use it as an index anyway. Like I said, it's done. Masking is done at the end stage. So after it's done all of your kind of pulling all that data together, doing all your joins, doing all your wheres, group bys, etc., and so forth, then it's actually masking that data to display it to the user. So a couple more on limitations and restrictions. For users without the unmasked permission, the deprecated read text, update text, and write text statements do not function properly on a column configured for dynamic data masking. Okay, so this is to do with deprecated functions. You need to be aware that if you are upgrading and using those read text, update text, etc., it's not the same. You still have to give them the unmasked permission. Okay. And adding a dynamic data mask is implemented as a schema change on the underlying table. This is something really important, and therefore cannot be performed on a column with dependencies. To work around this restriction, you can first remove the dependency, then add the dynamic data mask, and then recreate the dependency. For example, if the dependency is due to an index dependent on that column, you can drop the index, then add the mask, then recreate the dependent index. Now that is a pain in the butt. I'm not going to lie, that is a bit of a pain to do, but something you need to be aware of if you are setting up these kind of like masks and you're finding that there's issues. Something to be aware of. This is why I say it's really important, because as soon as you, if you take in that bit, even if you don't remember all of it, even if you take it in a little bit and go, okay, I need to go and look at the Microsoft documentation of how to do this, then at least you know it's there. So quick security note, the unmasked permission is database wide. So if for some reason, say you've got a legal requirement to hide the credit card numbers, and you decided to mask that, you wanted a really quick way, you've got an old application, you can't change the application for whatever reason, you've lost the source code, that does happen by the way, then you do this on the database side, you hide the credit card, okay? But then you have some other, maybe it's company policy to hide the, let's go for customers' phone numbers. So you can't, so you've hidden the credit card details to everyone. You don't want anyone to see that. Just your application is able to do it. So it's got an application account that you've given the unmasked permission to. You've now got some numbers, and somebody's been misusing them. Somebody's been calling people, calling customers, and they shouldn't have done. So you end up masking that column. However, you still need your, I don't know, your deliveries team in order to call those customers, in order to make sure that they, are going to be in on that certain date wherever you're going to be delivering it. So you then put a mask on that as well. Sounds really good. Okay, you've masked those two very quickly with an old application. That's why you've gone with dynamic data masking. But now with your deliveries role, say it's a Active Directory role or it's a SQL Server role, you've got deliveries, so you've got quite a few people in that role. You then give unmask to it. They can now see the credit card details. So now you've kind of broken that legal requirement that you had in order to hide that data from certain people. So there is your issue. You could of course block them in other ways, but you've got to be really careful. It is database wide, and so being very careful, you've got to be very, very careful with actually using this and make sure that you are only giving permission to people that should have permission. And this is something you really, really, really need to be aware of. And that's why I've put that there. It's just really important. This is where it doesn't work. So a user who can run ad hoc queries can actually guess the masked value. Like I said earlier, when you're actually using dynamic data masking, it's done at the end stage. So when you're using a where clause, as we'll see, there we go. When you're using a where clause like this, it will still return those. So say the salary is actually the masked column. Well, what can we see here? We've actually done a query which has specified exactly what the salary is. And so I've been able to guess these two salaries for Jane Doe and for John Smith because of this query here. So even though the salary is masked, it's still included in the initial where. And so you can guess it. So if you've got somebody that can brute force ad hoc queries, they can get every single value in there. You could do it where salary equals 1, 2, 3, and then you could end up dumping that out. And you can just do it kind of iteratively, and you can actually get all of the data anyway, so it doesn't hide it completely. With things that are like salary numbers and things like that, it doesn't work. Credit cards, again, you could do the same if it was 00001, 00002, and they could go all the way up, and then they could start getting them, and they could actually start grabbing those numbers. It would take a lot longer. And same with email addresses. You could just iteratively work your way through, and you could get that data. So don't rely on it too much. So it's not the most secure. Probably for those kind of things, you want to actually encrypt it. Always encrypted is a pretty good option with SQL 2016, but we'll kind of go over that in another video. I'll show you guys how that all works, and how to set that up and everything, and all that kind of stuff. So there we go. One thing you really need to be aware of, both of these two are probably the biggest things you need to be aware of from a security angle, definitely. So what we're going to do now, guys, is we're going to go on to some labs. So I've got this link here, which you guys will have in the description. Do click on it. This is the link to the Microsoft documentation, which is absolutely brilliant, as always. So I will catch you guys when I've got all that set up, and we're going to start doing some lab work. We're going to set this up. Okay, so what I'd like you guys to do is just click on that link, make sure you've got it open. This is the official Microsoft documentation for dynamic data masking. So there's extra information there that I haven't gone over, but I've gone over all the main points. So I've kind of skimmed through this, grabbed everything I need out of this one, or what I think you guys will need, all the kind of useful bits and bobs. And what we're going to do is we're going to go down to the example section. So like I said, Microsoft has got some really good examples. And we're going to just grab this script here, so you can just click on copy, which is great. I will be going over the T-SQL for like create tables and insert into all that stuff in different videos. You don't need to know it to be able to do dynamic data masking, so don't worry too much. But if we just copy that one. Now, I want you guys to go into SSMS. I haven't got a test database at the minute, so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be creating a new one. So it's nice and easy. I like doing it in capitals, so it's create database. If you've already got one, don't worry about this. I'm going to call it YouTube examples. Okay, and I'm just going to execute that. That's created my new database. So if I just refresh here, there we go, YouTube underscore examples. If you've already got a test database that you guys are using, then feel free to use that. And the only other thing we're going to do is I'm just going to do a use to get onto that. You can either use, or you can actually just do it up here, and you can click down. It's really quite useful. Okay, I'm just going to pull that down a little bit. So if I now scroll out a little bit, let's go through what we're actually doing. So we're creating a table called membership. There's columns, member ID, which has got an identity, primary key, etc. First name, varchar, and then masked with function equals partial, 1, we have 7 x's, then a 0. Okay, so we're going to have a look at that. It's also, it can be null, which makes sense. And last name is not null, no mask on that one. Phone number has got a mask on it, and it's function default. So remember we talked about default and what that does. So because it's a varchar, we should get those 4 x's. That's what we should get on that mask. You don't need to worry about it too much. Just have a look at those the documentation if you want to see examples of what each of those does. Email, well, we're going to have the typical kind of email thing. So if we just run this statement, oops, not new query. Run this statement, there we go, got that there. If you look in tables, we got this membership table. So I'm just going to do select top 1,000 in there. So we've got no data in there, but there's no there's no data in there at the minute. So if we do this insert statement, I'm just going to pull that down to there. We're just going to do a simple insert statement just to have some data going in there. So if we run that select statement, what we can see is the data that we've just inserted, those 3 rows. You can of course add your own ones if you wanted to. Just copy one of these lines, put a comma underneath it. We go, put in Bob. Bob Who's apparently, and he's going to just have a very similar number. Bobby Who's Contoso.net. So I'm actually just going to insert that one. So if I just create new statement, insert into, there you go. If I just run that, I'm just going to insert an extra row into there. So that's just how you would do it. Obviously, if you haven't got already done the insert into, you don't need to worry about throwing that back in there, but I had to. So there we go, we've got a couple more ones in there. So we've got 4 values, so we can have 3 values. It doesn't really matter too much. So we can actually just see, very, very simply, that we can actually see the data unmasked, okay? So what we need to do is we need to create a new user. Again, this is where I will be going over this in a separate kind of video, but we don't need to worry about it. So if we grab this script here, just paste that in. So what it's going to do is it's going to create a user, and it's going to have it without a login. So it's just a test user, which is absolutely fine. And we're going to grant select on membership to the test user. Okay, so this is quite important because then we're going to create the user. We're also going to give him permission to do select queries. Okay, makes sense. Now the next thing, we're going to execute as user. This is a really good statement. This is great for testing, so we don't have to actually log in, because we could do connect database engine, go on to SQL Server authentication, put in that login name, etc. and so forth. Don't need to do that because it's just a test user. It's not a real user. We can actually just do it in T-SQL. This is probably one of the most one of the best commands you can actually use, especially if you're doing store procedures and things like that. So execute as user, test user, select all from start from membership, so all the columns, and then we're going to revert. So that means it will switch it back from executing as this user, and it will revert it to our actual user. Okay. So there we go. So now what do we see? Well, now we actually get to... I found it. I found the button. No, that's not the button. Oh, I was thinking I found the button then for making this one bigger, but I haven't. So what we've got down here now, we've got those masks applied. So do you remember when we had the masks up here? Mask with function partial. Okay, well we can see that now. Okay, we can actually see that partial. What I might do is actually an update statement in a bit to make that name a little bit longer. But we can actually see that it's been masked on first name. We can see that it's been masked. The phone has been masked to that default function. Here we go. That we have here. Which, like we saw, if it's a string value, it will turn it into 4 X's. And we've also got the email one as well, so we can actually see all of those in there. Let's grab the next statement. Let's go down a little bit. So the next couple bits are to do with altering that table and how you'd alter it. And we're gonna apparently we're gonna change the column. So there's the T-SQL for it. So we're going to alter the membership table, we're going to alter the column last name, and we're going to add a masked with function. So that's what we're going to add onto it. So as you remember from when we created it, there was no masking on there. We can see that the last name is quite clearly visible. So we're going to alter the table, membership, alter column, last name, add mask function, mask with function partial. Okay. So now if we do this one again, we'll see that there, we can see it's got two. First two you can see, so G and A. Then we've got XXX and then 0. But because this one, because his last name down here, Moo, was just 2 characters, that would have shown the entire last name. So the masking function is quite good for this because it will actually then hide those, and it's just showing you the ones that you can actually kind of mask. Because if it's just 2, it's just done Moo, and then you've got their last name, so that wouldn't be very good. Okay. And here we go. If we alter one of them this time, we're just going to alter the last name column apparently. Let's go alter. So alter the table, membership again. Alter the column last name, and we're going to mask with function default this time. So we're switching over. So this is just how you would alter a mask. Nice and easy. There we go. Do that. Now if we execute as user test user again, now we can see default is XXXX. XXXX, yeah, 4 X's. So we can now see that it's actually applied that. So that's how simple it is to do it. Now, if you want to grant the unmasked permission, let's have a look here. Let's grab this query and let's have a look at it in here. It's a lot I find it a lot clearer to actually see it in here. So grant unmasked to test user. So, like I said, it is on everything. If you wanted to do, this is where I think it needs to be improved. So if you did on, would be the normal kind of way of doing it, on membership to test user, you'll come back with an error. You actually can't do that query, which is a real shame because I would like to tie it down to the actual column level or the table level, but you can't. Instead, you just grant it to them as a whole. Okay. So then test user will now have the unmasked permission, and so when they do this, they can see all of the data for that table unmasked. Not just that table, all of the data for the entire database unmasked, as long as they have select permission on those tables. And revoking, nice and easy, revoke unmasked to test user. Makes sense. Really does make sense. Okay, so if you want to drop a mask, nice and easy. What we're going to be doing, there we go, pull this down here. Alter the table membership, makes sense. Alter column, last name, drop masked. Okay, makes perfect sense. It's because everything is masked. It's not mask or anything like that, so that's why it seems a little bit strange, but kind of makes sense. So then we're going to drop that on the last name. Now, if we execute as that user, they can now see that data. These 2 are still or these 3 are still masked, but the last name isn't masked anymore. Okay, and that's pretty much it. It's nice and simple. Hopefully that's given you guys a couple examples. I'm actually going to drop table membership just to clean up my lab because I don't need to have membership at all. It's up to you guys if you want to do that. You could also, of course, drop user, test user as well, or you could use the GUI to do either of these. I like to practice T-SQL as much as I can, mainly because it can pop up in the exams. And also knowing how to do both of them is pretty good. What we should have now is, there we go, if we refresh tables, we haven't got that table in there. If we go on to security now, there's 2 securities, we'll talk about that in another thing here, but you can see on users, test user doesn't exist either. So we've now cleaned up our lab a little bit. But that's it, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully that's made a lot more sense to you about what dynamic masking, data masking is, how you should use it, and also what to be aware of its limitations, because that is one of the major things in it. If you do have any questions at all, please feel free to comment in the comment section below. But yeah, if you have any problems at all, let me know, and we'll see if I can answer those. So thank you very much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you have, comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.